Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Again, I'm Charlotte Gapasin, and I am going to defend my thesis tonight. The title is Accessible Tourism as a Driver of Economic Growth and Environment and Social Equity. First of all, I want to give an introduction. Last year when I joined the YPA, I have presented a topic about disability in sports. So when I decided to continue the master's, I want to be able to incorporate what I want to contribute in the community. And so this is an attempt for me to put a plan and a research to prove that accessible tourism will contribute on the economic growth, environmental and social equity. So please, I'll be happy to receive your comments because I want to improve. So just please send your critique anytime. Okay. The research was divided into 8 chapters. Chapter 1, I will discuss the scope, aims, and objective of the study, the methodology of the study, organization of the study, importance of the study, and limitations. In Chapter 2, I will elaborate accessible tourism and the introduction, trends in recognition and disability, infographics of tourism and accessibility tourism, accessibility in details, tangible and intangible effect of accessible tourism, social and cultural impact of accessible tourism, environmental impact of accessible tourism, economic impact, and the risk of implementing accessible tourism. I will cite examples of growth in gross domestic product, which is the GDP, and then I will give you a preview of the top and lowest accessible cities in the world. On Chapter 3, I will discuss the growth in accessibility. We'll give some statistics of the world's GDP in tourism and sports tourism, and then the GDP forecast for accessible tourism. And then for Chapter 4, methodology and models, I will be citing some projects that has been done and created in different parts of the world, maybe those that are either close to me or countries I have visited, and countries that most of the implementers that I have met, and I can see that it's visible to be copied by countries in a third world country. Sorry. So in Chapter 5, I will cite some case study that has been started in Qatar. Since everyone knows that I'm residing in Qatar, so that would be my my ground of research, main ground of research. And then Chapter 6 is the quality of life with accessible tourism. So there I will discuss the positive impact of accessible tourism and a happiness indicator. And then I will give you some examples of top 10 happiest countries. In Chapter 7, I will be discussing some interviews and results that I did of a different segmentation I made, which I will elaborate later on. And then for Chapter 8, I will be giving you the conclusion of my research and the recommendation. Of course, the acknowledgement and the references. So my references here and figures is I had 10 figures provided in the study for the references of laws and the chapters accordingly, and then I have references of the countries in the model, and then I have 4 tables that I'll be presenting, and so I'll start with the abstract. Tourism is a great form of recuperation and escape from the busy life we have between our workload, studies, and errands. But can tourism be for all? What if you are privileged? What if you are not privileged and financially capable? Or someone with limited vacation time? Does traveling then will tourism be enjoyable or exhaustion? What if you're a pregnant, old, or differently abled person, or a person with less mobility? Will you be able to go places where you will have limited access to? What if you're a citizen of war, a baby boomer, and a retiree without company to travel together with? Is it safe to be elsewhere than your garden and bedroom? Although we can think about many ways, many what-ifs and conditions, what can be considered as tourism for all? Is there any place considered to be tourist spot for all? Absolutely yes. In this paper is a consolidation of facts, ideas, and some case studies about accessible tourism or tourism for all. This will also highlight the impact of tourism on economic growth, environmental and social equity, a topic that is not very well publicized in places and countries or cities or provinces where accessibility is not strictly implemented as part of the urban and city development. This paper will also illustrate the driver of economic growth, environmental and social equity through accessible tourism and how it differs from regular tourism. The goal at the end of this paper is to convince and encourage the reader to help spread awareness of inclusion and equality by implementing accessible tourism to cities, especially those in third world countries and countries ranked lowly on the happiness index. In Chapter 1.1, Trends of Paralympics Movement to Para-ability. By the way, my passion on providing topics and service to disabilities, because when I volunteered for Paralympics, they have motivated me that having a complete parts of the body is actually a gift, because even them, they don't have, they're blind, but they don't complain. They don't have legs, but they race. And they're champions. So this is actually where everything started. So in here, I will introduce the word, and you will hear a lot of the word para-ability, wherein in 2006, after the completion of the Social Olympics, many people with disabilities decided that they no longer wanted to be called disabled. They felt that the name was negative in portraying them. Some said that they wanted to be called people with para-ability. They felt that the name was positive in connotation. People with para-ability wanted the world to recognize them not for the things that they cannot do, but for the things they can do. They felt that the things they can contribute to society are more important than what they could not. In this thesis, I will explore different aspects of this train of thought. We will identify that what is the common perspective of life, especially in tourism. In order to lend merit to this study, we must look at the things that the para-ability are limited in doing and how they overcome the challenges when they travel. The converse must also be explored and outlined. Para-abilities or people with disability are non-limiting and how they can use the contribution on a large scale. Traditionally, para-ability persons are thought of a burden to society, and so they called disabled persons. Most people, when asked, would think of disabled as people or person with mental disability. They discard the millions who have physical disability, or one of the limbs, or many with disability of the back, for instance. They all fall into new para-ability category, and as such, should be looked for their overall potential and contribute to society as a whole. These people can provide a different outlook and approach of everyday life and would increase the quality of life for all. As such, their contribution can be added to the entire community for this betterment. If consideration of para-ability persons were included in all, we endeavor the accomplished society as a whole would be better. Contributing to society starts at the lowest level of works its way up its way up. If laws which are inclusive for para-ability person are implemented and followed by ability to recoup the initial expenditures is achievable. I'm talking about the economic impact. The financial strains to that, so many complain about will so many complain that will drive down by person which they deem the cause. Our perception would be changed and based on solely individual performance for financial performance of the programs that will be provided to them. It will benefit to withdraw in the para-ability community. The scope 1.2, scope and aims of the objective of the study. The shout of inequality and hunger of inclusion is now slowly diminishing through the help of the dedicated people who continuously contribute to the formation of equality and inclusion. I am beginning my journey to be part of the movement, and so I want to use this study as a platform to examine how para-ability people or people with a disability can make contributions to the growth of the country or the city. This study aims to expand our understanding on the accessibility being provided to the disabled people and how to further enhance the possibility of making the disabled sector a huge contribution in tourism and sports to achieve high GDP growth in the near future. 1.3 is the methodology of this study. Researches and references of various sources have been gathered. Since I am currently residing in Qatar, the methodology will be patterned in Qatar's development accessible tourism with literature based on international concepts. Application will then be generic that can be adopted by different countries, communities, or individuals. The organization of the study, 1.4. This thesis is divided into 8 chapters when I have considered to structure my thoughts from an introduction of accessible tourism to looking at the impact of accessible tourism on economic, environmental, and social growth. I have provided some case studies to where I can see examples that can highlight it and demonstrate the impact of each model on the growth. The same models can be used as a niche to remodel a case by readers who would be interested to implement improvement of accessible tourism in their respective community. The importance of this study, 1.5. The importance of this study is to highlight the very individual has the right, that every individual has the right to enjoy our nature, technology, jobs, and life overall. Tourism for all is what we want to echo, especially to those developing countries. 1.6, limitations of study. This paper is limited to discussing types of disability or particular law, and through the implementation of accessibility as such technical requirements of building structure, for example, or transportation requirements of that sort. Chapter 2. Accessible tourism. Accessible tourism is a growing industry for organizations that deal with inclusion and people with disability. Accessible tourism is applicable for all humans with life that have equal right to enjoy life, travel and tourism, sports. When this term is used in this thesis, it implies these elements that will include the trends of recognition of disability. The needs of disabled travelers was in demand over early 1900s. So accessible tourism or tourism for all started in Europe in 1989. This was 40 years after the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is about equality regardless of race, color, sex, language, religion, political and other opinions, national and social origin, property, birth, or other status. This is Article 1.2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Continuation of freedom movement, which is Article 13, and then ensure rest of the leisure in Article 24. Disability is a major topic that most countries and people thinks needs more attention in a larger financial aid from the government. Through the help of activists and influencers, most people started to understand that the disabled people only needs equal opportunity and inclusion to have the fair experience of life. The stigma on sympathizing and empathizing with disabled person is slowly changing to where they are given the chance to acquire equal education and employment that best suits in different level of disability. Generally, accessible tourism doesn't only focus on people with disability, but for people that needs extra resources, enhanced mobility, and extra hand to enjoy travel into this tourism and sports. Among the 7 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, in goal number 11, which says focus on principles to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe and resilient, sustainable. These goals capture tourism and recreation creates call for provisions of universal design for accessible and sustainable transport system, inclusive urbanization and access to green and public spaces. Its 2011 declaration, the United Nations World Tourism Organization, or UNWTO, predicted tourism will increase and experience sustainable development, reaching 1.8 billion of international tourists in 2030. Accessible cities and tourism provisions therefore ensure that the social and economic inclusion of all persons with direct benefits of promoting more sustainable travel habits among users. Then I have attached the sustainable goal reference number 11. 2.2 infographics of tourism and accessible tourism and economy. Tourism in general is one of the biggest industries in terms of global economic distribution, comprising of 3.9% or of the 8.8 trillion US dollars economic activity of the world. The combined gross domestic product of the world through tourism was $8.3 trillion in 2017, and which accordingly from Forbes is my reference. In 2016, United States travel and tourism output represented 2.7 of the US gross domestic product, or GDP. While the majority of activity in industry is domestic, expenditure international visitors of United States totaled 244.7 billion in 2006 and has an increase of 83.9 billion trade surplus for that year. Travel and tourism and sports generated 10.4 of economic activity in 2018 for Asia and the Pacific, especially including Oceanic, Australia, Malaysia, Indonesia, South Pacific Islands, Southeast Asia, India, and China. While in North America, including Canada, Mexico, United States, and become the third largest growth of 8.2 from 2017 to 2018.
You can skip some sections, you don't need to read the whole thing.
Accessible tourism in detail.
Which page is it?
To page 12, sorry.
Okay.
Page 12. Accessible tourism in detail. In the recent study, people with different level of disabilities include 15% of the world population, which means 1.1 billion from 7.7 billion total population. This is based on 2018. Based on this, the statistics, about 50% of the total population is the middle class, where a person earns of an average wage enough to sustain the day-to-day expenses. The rest of each society are divided between low and high social classes. So I'll just give some percentage here. Still page 13. Based on the 70-year average life expectation, at least 10 years of one person will be spent in either domestic or international travel, tourism, and sports. Domestic travel includes the visit within the country, and international, of course, is outside the resident country. According to U.S. travel associations, the travel index, that is over 4% of the travel increase in 2017 to 2018. But the biggest contribution has a potential for domestic traveler. This observation, why domestic has more demand, is possibly because the cost of the travel, airfare, transportation, accommodation, and side entrances, food, and others. But who really needs accessible tourism? Although initial answer would be people with disability, mobility problems, sight and hearing impairment, autistics, and other level of medical disability. It is not limited to those alone. Accessibility is also for retirees, baby boomers. Baby boomers are the persons that are born between 1946 to 1965 and now at the age of this bracket, or pregnant women or travelers with kids. There are tangible and intangible effects of travel tourism. There are multiple effects of travel tourism in community. The emergence of tourism in majority of the countries ignites tourists to be experienced the journey right before their eye, ensuring travelers to have enjoyable tourism. The tangible effect on a positive note are demand of employment, increase of social ads, improvement of tourist spots, increase of production, high demand on security, while the intangible effect are increase of happy people, inclusion, and high morale. Now, the social and cultural impact for accessible tourism. Social and cultural impact are changes made in the lives of local people. Improvements in infrastructure, lifestyle changes. When tourism is active in a certain locality, the neighborhood develops alongside. Cultural prevention is important to be attractive in tourists. This is tendency of locality to maintain and preserve the fascinating sites to enable the tourists to appreciate the culture in every part that they visit. Travelers appreciate history and humble beginnings of every place upon discovery of feeling fulfilled.
Please say the time's up.
The environmental effect.
You need to go on to another chapters.
Okay.
You can just read the headings and important things.
Okay.
2.6 as well.
2.6?
Yes, the headings.
Okay. 2.6 environmental impact. This refers to the impact of nature and surroundings area. Environment protection is important as discussion of environmental ethics. Economic impact can be quantified in terms of monetary benefits or overall economic development of the society.
2.8.
And then 2.8, the risk of implementing accessible tourism. There can be several factors that is risky upon implementation of accessible tourism. It's not direct impact as a whole, but considered as a cause and effect. One can be healthcare, for the people that come in and out, more potential increase of spread of viral infection, for example, flu and other contaminating disease. Some are, since the employment is higher, then there can be more demand on physical test failure or insurance claims, etc. There can be political chaos, corruption, or office abuse. Examples of growth.
Okay, 2.9,
2.10. I just cited some of the happiest countries in the world. Sorry, top and lowest accessible countries in the world.
2.11?
2.11 would be...
Or 2.10 to
2.10.2, the lowest accessible cities. I'll just mention. So
some point about the old cities is what?
Sir?
What's about the lowest accessible cities?
Okay, normally the lowest accessible cities are because the old cities has old heritage buildings, so they cannot change the pavement, for example, or the ramps so easily because the costing is high. Also with the old system of transportation, it's like changing the whole system back from the start. It will be costly for them. That's the major problem why they cannot improve the accessible tourism as fast as the other progressive country. On Chapter 3, GDP growth in tourism and sports tourism. The growth of travel and tourism is 3.9, which is equal to 8.8 trillion contribution. Now, with the job increase, of course. And then the GDP measure of economic outputs. This important of output of nation are the elements that drives. These are the elements that drives GDP. Number one is the personal consumption, which includes one's retail sales And then number 2 is business investment, which includes construction or any other sales, flights, for example. Number 3 is government spending, including social security, defense spending, or let's say medical insurances. And number 4 is net trade, difference between monetary value and import and export.
Okay. And then you've got some tables.
Yes, I have some tables here, most visited countries. I'll just mention the first 5: Maldives, Seychelles, Macau, Antigua, Barbuda, and Bahamas. Mostly islands, so we will see that the nature is one big factor of best top travel country in the world. The lowest ones are, some are actually, when I read it, I don't even know, Lithuania, Russian Federation, Paraguay, Poland, and South Korea.
Okay. Level 2 as well.
Yes.
You've done that. So
3 point.
just the headings.
3.3, the GDP of 2013. I have provided some collective data, which is a factor that we need to provide for a disabled person. So when I had an interview, I asked them what are the factors that they need to travel. So they said first online queries, and then of course they are considering logistics. How they going to transport air, bus, or car, and then hotel, and then food. And of course transportation and technology and mobility. If there are, let's say, wheelchairs at the airport, or around the city. And then there are figures I have provided for the travel and departure, the tourism chain. In chapter 4, these are case studies or the models that I called, which I cited the development of accessibility and the rationale why I have taken the city. So 4.1, first example is Milan Tourism. The accessible project of Milan Tourism was adopted on this thesis after accessible tourism Qatar conference, and I had a conversation with the vice director, bringing the mass of accessibility of Milan. Milan is one of the top visited cities in Italy. It's well known for great architecture and fashion, and it's been a challenge for them to improve the city into accessibility for all. One of the reasons are the restoration of the heritage and art of a specific destination, since renovation requires certain specifications, for example, incorporating ramps in the old buildings. Another reason is that some of the walking tours are still with cobbled road and will require bigger budget and financial support of stakeholders.
You need to go on, time is running out.
And then the second example is
just the headings.
Chapter 4, just read the headings.
I'm on page 32, sir. The second project is Eden Project. It is a project, fascinating, accessible park located in Cornwall, England.
Go to the next one.
And number 4.4 model is the American Disney Worlds. It's one of the famous destinations with access to all Disney parks. And number 4.5 is Japan Accessible Center. They have one of the most organized accessible centers in the world. So I have cited took a table for their process as well. And then 4.6, the Invictus game. This was launched by the Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex in London. The main goal is to be able to rehabilitate the wounded and injured sick servicemen. So through the game, has a similar concept of warrior games from America. This will give them, the veterans, the chance to compete to each other, and then to give the disabled community a sports. But all the rules of this are also under International Paralympic Committee. And then I have cited some UNESCO projects, which most you will see are captioned because these are the instructions, and also the UN, which is in page 43, are the instructions for application of funding. For example, one city would like to apply for funding to develop accessible tourism. There is a fund provided by UN, so this is the application instructions. And then the sources of funding for accessible tourism, for voluntary fund for disability. And then chapter 5, the case study in Qatar. This chapter highlights the Qatarian base ground of the research. So Qatar is now, 4 years ago, they have provided and started Accessible Qatar that takes care of all the development of accessibilities in Qatar. So one of the project is, of course, Accessible Qatar. They provided the website to where a disabled person or people with disability can look to see where they can go, where they can find some assistance. So they can also see like the streets if they are accessible or not, from the airport up to the tourist spots. Now we have accessible park in Qatar, first ever in Qatar. And then Doha Festival City is one of the biggest mall in Qatar that is accessible. And then chapter 6, quality of life with accessible tourism. Positive impact of accessible tourism as a happiness indicator. So basically, what I formulated here is the with accessible tourism. Accessible tourism is equal to good quality of life because number one, it gives high morale. When we have the inclusion of people with disability, you give them a high morale, and then it gives impact on the employment rate of a city or a country. And of course, the GDP is a measure of national produce. So the production goes high also if there's accessible tourism, because more tourists, then they have to do some local products to introduce. That's one example. And of course, quality of life is love of life, nature, and animal and environment. So more people will be aware about the beauty of the nature. And then I have cited some happiest countries in the world here.
Okay. Maybe go on to
this page 61. First, in Finland is top 1.
Okay. And you can go to the next chapters.
Okay. Chapter 7 includes the results of the interview. So I have interviewed 10 people with the following segmentation: people with disability, persons with the working, or people that is not disabled but working with people with disability, baby boomers or old people, millennials, pregnant women, children or teen, part of the millennials, and then retirees, citizens of war, some retired militaries I have also interviewed, and then average working citizen. So in conclusion, there's out of 10 questions, majority of the people, first question was, what makes you desire for a holiday? So majority says for fun and leisure. And then the second question, what do you value on a holiday? And explain, they said self-contentment. Majority of them, that's 7 out of 10. What are you looking for holiday or traveling and its purpose? Majority says nature, culture, or history or sports. That's 7 out of 10 also. And then number 4 question is the virtual tourism, if they want the virtual tourism. So that's yes, majority. Number 5, do you consider accessibility when you travel for holiday? They said yes. Number 6 question is if they would consider autonomous vehicle. Majority of them says it's okay, yes, but they want to have a control over their own mobility, whether they are disabled or not disabled. How do you think of the persons that impacts tourism? The 8th question, do you consider your current location as accessible? Majority says no. Only 2 of them said yes, which is 1 from Europe and 1 from America. And then number 9, can you consider accessible city safe? They said yes. And what makes you happy as a traveler? They said good memories, safety, and accessibility. Now in conclusion, 8.1, page 72. Inclusion was a focus of this research, and we can see that the message presented in the websites and messages that were promoted in this case study that were selected. The rise of accessible tourism is apparent. So in one good example, there's still a need of further education of companies and tourist operators, sports organizers, and all sectors in society to implement practical and affordable measures for promotion of inclusion. Such education needs to be done in order to create more awareness amongst different target groups, including people who need greater accessibility. For me, inclusion is a major key to a successful accessibility campaign, where inclusion become normal to all stakeholders, so that improvement to accessibility will be easier. Let's break the barrier. That's what I conclude. Let's break the barrier to poor accessibility or organization or innovation. Accessibility requires unification of stakeholders, individuals, and authorities. And then 8.2, my recommendations. I have divided it into different parts. The recommendation to the people considering tourism who do not require accessible tourism. My recommendation is to be responsible of the surroundings in nature, be educated, be aware, and be compassionate to the community. Contribute time for the development of accessible tourism, and cut the stigma of disability and change the culture from home. And then the recommendation for people with abilities who require accessible tourism is to be confident, accept the disability, and enjoy life and participate the development. To the hotels and industry like airline company, to start applying approach to the project such as building specification, strict construction and building accessible laws, and issue a no permit for a no accessible plan. Training programs for staff so they would know the first-hand assistance to people with disability. And then recommendation for tourist associations to develop a technology such as travel websites online, and then volunteer in different programs. To the government, broad awareness of inclusion, apply best practices of accessible tourism, bring accessible concept to a smaller entity of the community, and collaboration with local government inclusion and funding. And of course, the strict implementation of the federal law and building codes. And that's it, sir.
Thank you.
There is, sir, acknowledgements.
Thank you. So, good job. Thank you, Charlotte. We have some questions, I think. Madam, would you like to start?
The context of your paper is Qatar, correct?
Yes, sir.
So if you are to assess Qatar's accessibility for disabled or differently abled people, how would you rate Qatar?
10 as the highest.
Yes.
I would say 6.
6.
Six.
So in terms of policy, state policies, do they have state policies that
Yes.
guarantees accessibility?
Yes.
Differently abled?
Yes. Starting from buildings, for example, I cannot give you the exact BS code, but if you're building new buildings now, when you apply the application for municipality wherein they require the architectural drawing, they are checking if you have, let's say, wider entrance and bigger spaces for toilets or ramps in front of the buildings and stuff.
Things like that.
It's things like that.
And there is an increase of differently able tourists in Qatar.
Yes, actually, some of the people that I have interviewed, they said it's fairly accessible in Qatar. You can tell when you arrive at the airport, they have accessible toilets, they have assistants, they have marhaba, if I'm not mistaken, they assist disabled people, and of course they have the pavement for blind people. And then also they have a company, subcontracting transport company at the airport that provides accessible transport, which has vans with ramps for either one or two disabled people. So they sit comfortably at the back of the van. So those are examples.
Yes, we have interviewed 10 disabled.
Yes.
Now, I'm interested to know the profile.
Yes.
What are, do you have a profile?
Yes.
And what are their disabilities?
If you can check on page 70, starting 78, I have attached all the questionnaires and their information. So I have asked them their name and then the segment from the segmentation.
Okay.
If with people with disability, for instance, I asked them to give me the disability, which is, for example, number 1 in page 78. Kim is one of the Paralympic, she's an athlete from the Philippines. So her disability is clubfoot. She is on a wheelchair and she doesn't have...
So what are the nationalities so far?
Combination of Filipino.
Filipino.
We have Filipino, American, European, and we have also from different part of Asia.
How about from Qatar?
We do have from Qatar.
How many disabled, sorry for that, differently abled respondents, interviewees?
4.
4.
And one retiree and one baby boomer.
4. In your paper, it's 3.
There are, because some are interviewed all over the phone as well. So I have attached here what I have received from the email, and some were sent to me by picture, photograph.
So you have done studies of 10 international organizations with accessibility, and in Qatar, the case studies 6 or 7?
I have 4.
4 from Qatar, and then you supplemented with interviews with people with different abilities,
Yes.
and then your observations and literature review.
Yes.
Okay, do you have any questions? Anyone? Ananya, do you have any questions? Do you think, what's the accessibility like compared to Turkey? How would you find the accessibility?
Accessibility, I have taken pictures actually when I arrive at the airport. I am quite impressed because I've been to the old airport. Now the new airport actually has, it's fairly accessible. They have...
Any more questions?
First of all, I want to say I congratulate you. It is very good study because disability people problem are also very important, and you study on it. Which disability, which kind of disability people have more problem according to your study, and which country they are happy?
Yes. First of all, thank you for the comment from based on my study, majority of the people that has orthopedic problem are the ones that is considerably taken on this study, because they are the one who requires more space and more access to different places. Normally, for let's say for blind with hearing or sight impairment, they come with their assistant, or their friend or somebody from the family. But with the one with the wheelchair, so most of them wants to have control over their mobility, because they don't consider themselves as disabled. They feel comfortable having the wheelchair with them. So that's my observation based on your question. Yeah. And then most visited is
Which country is best for them? Or which country is ready for these disabilities people?
Yeah, actually,
For example, Qatar. I want to learn something about Qatar. Qatar is very rich country, I think. Therefore, maybe Qatar's possibilities or facilities will be better, or are better
yes,
than other countries.
Yes, it is actually, because now the development in Qatar, since they have really lots of funding, first is the implementation of the law on buildings as well. It is strictly implemented. So when they start the building, it has to be, some part are accessible. For most of the major facilities in Qatar are brand new. So when they started the buildings, they have already considered the restrictions or the codes on the buildings for disability, because they follow the European standards.
Oh, it is good.
Yes, they follow the European standards. And they have hosted also Paralympics in Qatar. So I think that's an indication that it is an accessible country.
More comments? Excellent.
You know, your study is really very unique, and I'd like to congratulate you because your study started just with the action plan.
Yes.
No, she presented it during the YPA, which was hosted by my institution in the Philippines, and then she was able to really come up with a very comprehensive study by following her passion, her interest, and then she studied different case studies. How many countries case studies that you were able to gather from your research?
I have 10.
Oh, see. And what are those countries again?
Milan, England,
Japan.
Cornwall, Japan. We have Qatar, of course. What else?
Qatar, England, Japan.
Yes. Wait, I would look into that.
I think Japan and England is similar.
Actually,
Economic condition, etc. Qatar is different, and the other countries.
because I have included not only the countries, but for example, Invictus Games.
Yeah. Yes.
So because I wanted to incorporate accessible tourism and sports tourism.
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
oh yeah.
And from all these countries, which is the best? That
Japan.
Japan.
Japan, I believe they have more. It's remarkably organized how they
even
how they
their-
set up.
I saw this in COVID, when we were in COVID. Even the grocery shops, they are made accessible to
Japan.
people with disabilities. So that the how do you call this, the cabinets or where the goods are, that's at the level where those in wheelchair can reach.
Japan government give more importance.
Yes.
For
Do you have US in your as a case study?
I did Disney parks.
This is yes, correct. Yeah,
Because that's one of, it's for leisure, for instance, and majority of the family, considering even let's say pregnant women, and if they have kids, first destination is Disneyland
No.
or Disney World. So I have considered that in the case
Yeah,
study.
I saw no, those with wheelchairs, they are the priority in that queue. They have a
Yes.
separate entrance.
Although in the happiest rankings, Finland is one of the first top ones.
Happiest.
Because it depends on the category, I believe. Like for example, in Norway, they are included in top 10 happiest because they're the only country that gives disabled person a license to drive.
Wow.
So that means
So I'm sure the vehicle is
accessible.
accessible.
Yeah.
What do you call that kind of vehicle for disabled? There is a name for that vehicle. Autonomous.
Autonomous vehicles are
also with the AI.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence.
yes, autonomous
Like what's
autonomous
the-
project is also
Yeah.
included here, and that's one of the projects that Qatar is implementing
Are
now.
they buying Tesla cars?
Qatar has a sustainable vision 2030, and one is the inclusion of people with equality and people with disability in that case. And
Is that
autonomous,
included in your
yes, ma'am.
good?
It's in the references as well. So we are hoping to have and have it started before FIFA. They would have pilot tests by next year. They will bring the buses in the park. Basically, the concept is, of course, it's artificial intelligence concept, but it will be a point-to-point or business-to-business. For example, the bus will be programmed according to locations. For instance, this will be the point one, and the next station would be, let's say, at the other corner. It's fully automatic, no driver, and all programmed car. That means it will be more accessible because it will have more space inside. And of course, the buses will be designed with the ramps. And,
In all the cases you studied, are differently able people given discounts in all the cases that you've studied?
given what's our
Discounts. It's also one factor in accessibility.
Yeah.
yes, but
Privileges
I
and
did not include
privileges.
this here because I did not tackle the factors needed what you call or benefits of disability. I did not tackle
They
this
can
here.
be encouraged to travel and visit places if they know they have discounts as this scheme.
So probably you can put that as part of your recommendation for further study for your PhD, for example.
Discounts in the Philippines for disabled people.
Yes, sir. They
Yes.
have in the Philippines 20% discount
And then you
20%
can compare.
in medicine as well.
Medicine, travel.
Medicine, travel,
In Philippines.
Yes, 20%
Yes.
discount.
Nice.
Even if you have diabetes, hypertension, you are
I have
included
diabetes.
in the discount.
Not
Yes.
only 20% plus 12%, almost 32%.
What about if
Depends
you?
on the city if they are adding more discounts.
So you're saying there's a discount for disabled people to enter to something. What
Yes.
about if a person needs to have a helper, an assistant person?
Helper.
Is the assistant granted entry for discount or entered free?
They have a card.
They have a card.
Yeah.
They present the card and they are given a discount.
So what about if they need an assistant? Does the assistant?
I don't think so.
No.
I believe it's the person that has disability is the one that has discounts. It's the same concept as senior citizen cards. So if I come with my father and I ordered food,
It
then they will
apply
only
to the-
compute my father's food.
But that's
In some cases, they will take the cheaper,
Yes.
lesser bill.
So you order the less, you ask the disabled to take the bigger order.
I must be getting old because in the Philippines in March, when there's a long queue for Super Pacific, maybe going to take 1 hour. And then this young man came to me and said, "Excuse me, sir, you can go to this counter, there's no queue."
This is for
And the counters for seniors. Oh dear.
Over 60.
Over 60, but I'm not over 60, but anyway. White hair.
White hair.
Thank you, Marlon. See, I won't dye it, it's better. I get save an hour.
Get artificial dye when you go to the Philippines, and black and then wash it afterwards.
So,
Just,
yes,
just a room for improvement. You just please check 7.1.
What are those three?
so these are in the
You have
results.
10 people interviewed, but what
Yeah.
are those three?
Yeah, well, those different. I'm confused. You just have
Because if we add all, that's more than 10.
yes.
So some people are under multiple criteria.
Oh.
Yeah, yes, sir. That's the answer.
So the three means, like people with disability, three. That doesn't mean you only interview three.
I categorize them according to the number of people. Like for example, Mrs. Prince, she's elderly and she's disabled now because she has a back. She
I
cannot
see.
walk, so she would require some assistance on.
So you interviewed 10, but different, kumbaga categories or because there are,
probably-
I see 15.
One, as
With
example,
multiple-
one
with
disabled but pregnant with that.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
with
So
multiple
Siguro just
segments. Yeah.
some names, some footnotes or legend that
Yes, because it's very
notes,
confusing.
Okay.
a sentence or two explaining that they are counted according to categories.
So, Manuel, if you can speak, please go ahead. Manuel has a question. Manuel's in Barcelona. He's wondering if there's a study in the transport and housing burden for working disabled people. And he's also worked with disabled people or differently able people in Barcelona. Manuel, do you want to try speaking? Is your mic?
Yes, I have thought about this because Barcelona, simply, is a very accessible city, but despite of this, the burden of housing, even when actually is covered by subventions and free bonus for the public transport. I know that it's very different in other cities. For example, when I live in Tallinn, in the Estonian capital, well, it's a charm of a city, but this is not accessible. I think that as long as I see, as long as I know, there is no comprehensive study of the burden that means going to the job, back to home, and back to an accessible home for a person who is working and who has this additional handicap with the times, with the organization of his own presence in the workplace. And thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Also, Manuel, because Barcelona is an old city, but made it accessible. So in Charlotte, you were saying sometimes the old cities, the heritage cities, are difficult to be accessible. But if you really want to be accessible, maybe you can. Yeah?
It depends, maybe, because if the study is based, for example, in a specific part of Barcelona, like for example in Milan, the development of accessibility, they focus at the center of Milan, wherein most of the tourists go. So I'm not sure exactly right now, but I'm just trying to understand. It is just my own opinion that maybe it is considered because they have developed some pavement, for example, and ramps in the center of Barcelona, where let's say I don't know how we call the center, but maybe they have already incorporated some ramps or some.
I was in Barcelona. There are some wrong. I've not been to Milan, but I saw. They support the disabled. There's a wheelchair are available.
Yes. They have that project called Milano per Tutti, which is Milan for everyone. So that they started that in 2011, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a project funded by the government, and it's still continuously happening now.
By the way, I'm showing Angelica, you can see Manuel. If you want to say hello, Manuel, please say hello.
Hi, hello,
And this is Charlotte, by the way. And then Jack is Indonesia, is most of the James in Indonesia.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mas,
Marlon, Lanya, Sukram.
Hello, how are you?
Sukram's almost as regular. Manuel's going to catch you up in the couple of years. He's so regular.
In the pictures that you made, were they using people with disability or differently able persons?
Disability.
Sometimes the correct term may people with disability, they still use the people with disability.
But majority are still using people with disability. Yes.
So it's more of the negative one.
Yes. Recently,
Because today they are using differently able people.
yes.
It's
Or
more positive.
there's new now, the word para-ability, which is included in the introduction. This actually came from people with disability who joined in Olympics because they are more comfortable now and they don't want to be called that they are disabled because they are able. You know, I have the one person who actually predicted that I'll be involved in disability is the president of the Paralympics in Angola. He told me that the true disability is just on the mind, Charlotte. This is what he told me. A person who doesn't have compassion, who doesn't think right, who doesn't have a plan and balance in life are the people with disability.
I agree.
Yes, this right here are all, you know, physically.
Maybe physically handicapped, but very much able, and you know,
Although we are all disabled in one way or the
in
other.
one way or the other.
Disabilities.
Yeah.
Maybe psychological disabilities.
Which is dangerous, of course. You know, when it comes to you are disabled in terms of attitude, in terms of so it would be better to be disabled rather than being able, and yet you have that bad heart for now, unkind, being unkind.
What about in the conversion project from Iran? How many people is it disabled people in Iran?
There are some, especially some religious cities like Mashhad, they're always so, they have always special places for disabled people. Because of, they conduct religious belief that they believe that if they come to their some religious places, they can get better. You know? So they have always special places for this person. For it's in Iran, in my country,
Okay.
they have the best places for disabled people in religious cities.
Okay.
Yeah.
In religious
In
cities.
religious cities.
Special place for for people that can't walk. They have special sidewalks. Yeah, special bathrooms, and they can be really comfortable. These places.
What about in Qatar? What about mosques? Are they suited for religious places? Are good for disabled people or not?
Majority are the Grand Mosque also are, because like I said earlier, most of the buildings are new. So when they started to build, they're already in a certain code to follow for accessibility.
Anyway, congratulations, I like the paper because one of human rights is freedom of movement, freedom of
Does anybody else have any more
Equality.
questions?
Freedom to enjoy life.
contribution to fulfillment to that right.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, I was at first I was thinking
I
to
asked,
focus on
I
the
told
Philippines.
you, right? Yes.
So I was,
This is very
my
good.
dream is to have
Study actually.
like a handbook to distribute and share to the government, maybe a local government, to start in a micro level. and then one by one it will grow and it will become macro. That's my plan. Hopefully, in God's in God's own time. Hopefully, it will happen.
Any other questions you've got? Dennis? You agree? What about accessibility for IT? Did you bring in the IT dimensions?
I supposed to bring in MADA Qatar. MADA Qatar is a company. It's an organization in Qatar that provides technology like in IT. And for example, they are translating Braille into audio. Yes, but I did not include it here because I have included only mostly on the buildings and infrastructures.
Okay. I think any more questions?
No more questions?
By the way, in terms of IT, there's a group of robotics in Qatar Foundation that is actually developing some instruments that they can use, for example, to break let's say an autistic kid, for example, he or she will wear this bracelet, and then through the palpitation and the heartbeat and of course the sweat and all that, it will detect, it will give them a prompt before,
Find some technology.
yeah, before they get irritated or angry, so they already did some tests, and now they are trying to develop that what you call that instrument,
Wearable.
wearable instrument, so they can apply to kids with autism.
Yeah, I don't have any question, but just commendation for a job well done.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you, ma'am, and Sir Darrell. Thank you for your patience, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, good night.
Thank you.